Hello, uh, I'm Miles Benjamin Hazley. I'm going to report to you my personal language experience and history.
You have said you are willing to do.
Right. I give my express and conscious consent to be involved in this uh, anthropological sharing of my experience for Yutong Liu. Uh, in her ethnography across cultures class. Ethnography of communications course. Sorry. Um, so anyway, my name is Miles Benjamin Hazley. I'm 29 years old. I was I was born in New York in 1987, June 30th. Um, my parents are of like Judeo-Christian background, but they both can't speak any languages other than English. I think my mother received some training in speaking Hebrew, but she can't anymore, and she couldn't at the time. So I grew up in a monolingual English-speaking household. Um, I never had any significant influence from any other languages while growing up. My housekeeper, though, was Jamaican. Um, so apparently, for a period of time, I spoke some Jamaican English or English with a Jamaican accent. Uh, but that wasn't for very long. Um, in my schooling, I've received and been educated in both Spanish and French. The times in which I was taught Spanish and French, I think it began while I was in middle school. I remember my first middle school language course was French, and that was a terrible experience because the teacher who was educating us was using the audiolingual method, but without any communicative purpose or interaction or activities. So, really, the majority of the class consisted of him telling us to repeat words in French. And I only really remember what he would say, which was classe répétée, which I don't even think is necessarily French. And if it is French, it's very poorly spoken French. But that's all I remembered from that French class. But years later, I would take French in my undergraduate college experience. So I got learned, acquired some French there, but very poor French. I don't recall how to speak or maintain a conversation in French. Anyway, after I learned French for a little bit in my middle school experience, later on, I'd say about 2 years later, um, I took Spanish, and that was with a pretty good teacher, much better. The majority of the focus was on Spanish literacy, though. So we would read books, we'd do, you know, vocabulary memory exercises. I guess we tried to learn grammar, but I didn't really remember that. So actually, no, that's not true. I remember looking at um, verb family charts from my Spanish class a lot. That and reading books in Spanish. But unfortunately, in my opinion, it wasn't a particularly strong Spanish program, and it wasn't continued throughout my academic career into high school consistently. Um, let's see, any unofficial or non-school based language experience at that time. I had a little bit of language encounters with Korean because there was a large Korean population where I grew up, which was on the North Shore of Long Island in Queens, so it was near Flushing. I grew up in Little Neck. So I had some encounters with native speakers of Korean who had emigrated to the United States. But that was just general language learning. Like I learned bad words. That's about it. Other than that, I don't think I learned any other Korean. That was when I was really young, though. I was probably in elementary school. Um, so yeah, up through my middle school experience, I didn't have much exposure to any other language education in any other languages, but I did have a lot of exposure to other languages, um, Spanish, Korean, Chinese, Turkish, Greek. In Queens, there are many different kinds of people and ethnic varieties, so they all speak different languages, and so I got to experience that. Mm, and mm, periodically throughout high school and my bachelor's degree, I took other languages. In high school, I continued taking a little bit of Spanish, and for my bachelor's degree, I took some more French. But I never really had a speech community to interact with. I didn't use it on a daily basis, and I think that a lot of my comprehension and understanding uh, and ability to use those languages is pretty stunted, but I like to believe that if I were in one of those environments for an extended period of time, uh, that I'd probably have a decent foundation because I mean I at least for definitely for Spanish because I can at least trill, which some people can't do that. So it's good that I can do that, right? So I'm pretty confident I'd be able to make all the sounds necessary to acquire and speak and develop my Spanish language skills at the least. And I can do the French uvular trill, although pretty badly. um, but I neglected to mention I'm a linguist. But regardless, I think that while my language experience when I was younger with foreign languages, specifically Spanish and French, while I didn't acquire like significant amounts of fluency or comprehension or productive ability, I think that I at least got an ear for the speech stream, and I am semi competent at breaking up the speech stream. So that's probably one of the first steps, right? If I wanted to acquire the language, so I would definitely have an advantage over someone who had never experienced either of those languages when they were young. Mm. But I think at this point I should address my native uh, language, my mother tongue, English. While I was younger, I was friends with a lot of black people, and in New York, it was the '90s, so black culture was huge with like Biggie Smalls, Nas, Tupac, Tribe Called Quest, um, and when I was little, I thought, you know, speaking AAE was really cool. So um, I tried to speak a lot of AAE as a speech variety, and while I don't really speak AAE, um, I don't have the appropriate register. My intonation isn't particularly along those lines. I incorporated a lot of the lexicon. Um, but my dad is into a lot of literature, so I also am really widely read um, with some of the more classic things. I read a lot of science fiction as well, um, and I guess that's made me something like an academic in terms of my vocabulary. Um, and what do I use my native language for? Well, right now I'm going to school, so I use it for academic purposes. Additionally, I use it to empathize with my friends, talk with my friends. I'm an educator as well. I teach ESL. Um, I use what I know about the language to now learn more about the language because for a long time I really didn't know too much about the actual technical details of languages, but even my own, like the grammar, for instance. Um, so yeah, daily conversation, academic conversation, presentation. Uh, I also know a decent amount of technical vocabulary in the field of biology because that was my undergraduate bachelor's degree was in that field as well as anthropology. Um, okay, so I should address now my what I consider to be my second language, which is Chinese. Yeah, Mandarin specifically. Um, So when I was 21, after getting my bachelor's degree, I moved to China for 4 years. I moved to Shanghai specifically. And when I went there, I didn't know any Chinese. I didn't know how to say hello, goodbye, nothing. So I was basically just completely new and inundated in the in Chinese as a second language environment, which was actually really great in terms of learning the language. Uh, but being in Shanghai was a disadvantage because there's a significant number of foreigners to China that live there. So actually, if you wanted to, it's really easy to get by without speaking Mandarin in Shanghai. Um, but nevertheless, I still did acquire quite a bit of Mandarin, mostly survival Mandarin, how to order food, how to tell a taxi where to go, how to say, oh, take me to this address, how to order a drink, how to tell a girl she looked pretty, right? Um, let's see, was there anything else I really used it for? No, initially, not really. So for about 2 years, because of my job and because of motivational factors, I didn't really learn any Chinese, just what I mentioned. Like, oh yeah, paying for things, right? And then after those 2 years, I decided that instead of working full time, I wanted to go to school full time. So while going to school full time, I learned a lot of in class vocabulary, how to maintain um, a casual conversation with somebody, ask them about their family, ask them about what they like, where they come from, what they think about certain things, um, if they had been abroad, what their opinions were. I could do that to probably like lower intermediate proficiency um, by the end of a year of education or 2 semesters, I guess. But at that time, I had to resume work because can't take off forever. And at that point, when I went back to work, I went and I taught little kids to speak English. And actually, that helped me learn more Chinese because I learned how to make imperative statements, ask them what they needed, what they wanted, and I learned basically the vocabulary that I was teaching them. I also acquired. So I'd say that year of experience was sort of like lexicon building up my vocabulary. In that, so when I returned to the U.S., which was after that year of teaching little kids, I became matriculated at California State University, Long Beach, and I also took more Chinese language courses, about 3 semesters worth, and I also took some metalinguistic Chinese language courses. So um, I've been studying Chinese, if you consider it from the first time I went to China and started encountering the language, since 2009. Uh, but I would probably consider it to be since about 2011, maybe 5 years. Probably a little less because there's some gaps in my education. So about 5 years of Chinese language education, Mandarin specifically. Um, so right now, I think my level is probably intermediate tops. It's my language proficiency is attrited significantly since coming back to the United States because I don't have a very good or extensive or large speech community here. Um, the speech community that I do have consists of some very close Chinese friends from the mainland, and they're wonderful people. I love them, and they do give me plenty of opportunities to speak Chinese with them, and they help me out. So it's a decent second language learning environment right now. Um, so the difference between my first and second language is, to me, extensive and ridiculous because I'm pretty much at like a very high threshold of English language proficiency because I'm pursuing my master's degree right now, and the 4 language skills for speaking, listening, well, maybe not speaking, you can judge for yourself, but in listening, reading, writing, my proficiency is very, very high, very high, for English. But for Chinese, my listening ability, my speaking ability is probably still beginner. My listening is probably intermediate. It's outstripping my speaking ability because speaking's hard. Speaking is difficult. Um, my reading is much better than my writing. My writing is terrible in Chinese. I can't accurately write very many Chinese characters, probably because I don't have much cause to sit down and write them over and over again, nor the time, um, which is unfortunate. But if you think about like the modern language era, when you can just write in a romanized form and then choose the correct character, really recognition is more important. Which is, I feel pretty good about my recognition abilities. They're they're decent, probably right around the intermediate threshold. But I would really like to keep improving my second language. Um, and actually, I've noticed that both my second language and my first language are having a mutual influence on the other. My first language influence on my second language is actually really evident because Chinese is a head final language and English is typically a head initial language, and I often, when I'm speaking Chinese, don't make a head final phrase, or so. I mean, that's a little funny, but hey, that's okay. People can understand me. It's no big deal. um, and the other way around, I noticed that at least I feel like I've started to use terminology in English that is almost a more direct translation of Mandarin Chinese sometimes. So I think actually there's the backwards influence as well, but it's not really in any other domains other than word choice and lexical choice. Not really in syntax or anything like that. Hmm. Oh. Um, I think that it's really underrated. I think that's all I want to say. Thank you.